none other than this version of Marco Rubio speaks to the uncertainty in testimony under oath before Congress about 3.5 weeks ago. Let me play that for you.
So I don't think anyone can give you a simple answer as to what happens next in Iran if the supreme leader and the regime were to fall, other than the hope that there would be some ability to have somebody within their systems that you could work towards a similar transition. I would imagine it would be even far more complex than the one we're describing now, because you're talking about a regime that's in place for a very long time. So that's going to require a lot of careful thinking if that eventuality ever presents itself.
So either Rubio misdirecting there or not in the loop that this was imminent? Your thoughts?
Or he's just giving analysis almost as like a passive observer, because to echo something Mark said, the only thing we heard in that speech from Trump about essentially a potential endgame inside of Iran is a call for the Iranian people to rise up. That literally was the only plan that could be identified in that speech for what happens after you decapitate the leadership of the Islamic Republic. And as John said, the regime very much remains in place. And the challenge with this is, Trump may want to go along with this for a period of time and then, call it quits. But inside of Iran and in the region, we could see all manner of consequences. We don't know how this is going to play out. There could be violence and civil conflict inside of Iran and a lot more bloodshed among Iranians who try to rise up and meet resistance from the Basij and the IRGC. There could be refugee flows into neighboring countries. We're already seeing Iran trying to inflict punishment on anybody and anything that they can that is somehow tied, in their view at least, to the U.S. presence in the region, disruptions to the global economy if they really do shut down the Straits of Hormuz. So we're entering a period of extreme uncertainty. And I think that uncertainty is kind of more pronounced because of the vacuum of explanation from the United States about where this is all going and what the end game is. And frankly, uncertainty tied to the fact that Donald Trump has done this in such an autocratic manner. Right? This is not a legal war. There's no authorization for it. There's little public support for it. There's little public explanation of what he's doing. We seem to just be along for the ride with his whims on this one. But what we have is a history of U.S. military regime change operations in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and Libya, leading to very unpredicted consequences that could last for very many years. And again, that's not because the U.S. military couldn't execute the mission. They could. It's what happens inside the politics of these countries after a regime change that has bedeviled the United States and that part of the world so much. And we just have so little clarity on where this is going.
General Hartling, can you speak to that there is no congressional authorization for war with Iran? And I think the last poll numbers I saw, upwards of 70% of Americans oppose a war with Iran.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, Nicole. It has to do with that golden triangle that Clausewitz talks about. The support of the people, the capability and the effectiveness of the government, and the ability of the military to do what they are supposed to do. If you have disconnects in any of those, the war is not going to go well. If the support of the people isn't there, if the government is conducting actions that are contrarian or are confusing, as Ben just said, no matter how good your military is, you can't execute a winning strategy on the political aspects of the war. One of the things I just want to comment on, too, when you played that tape of Secretary Rubio talking, he said, I hope that things will go well. Well, hope isn't a strategy. You really have to plan things out. You really have to make sure that you're prepared for any eventuality because, as Ben just said, the enemy always gets a vote. And that vote sometimes is different than the way you want the war to end up. That's what we're seeing right now, that there seems to be a lot of emphasis on the military, but not so much from the support of the people or the effectiveness of the planning mechanisms and the vision of the government. So there are those disconnects.
Director Brennan, Mark Mazzetti of the New York Times was here yesterday on our program talking about this reporting in the New York Times. Under the headline, "In Trump's Case for War, a series of false or unproven claims," quote, as they made their public case this week for another American military campaign against Iran. President Trump and his aides asserted that Iran has restarted its nuclear program, has enough available nuclear material to build a bomb within days, and is developing long-range missiles that will soon be capable of hitting the United States. All three of these claims are either false or unproven, end quote. What does it mean to start a war against Iran without the credibility of the three publicly stated rationales being true or being, quote, false or unproven, end quote?
Well, I think it just underscores just how unnecessary and reckless this war is. And also, I believe that this war was hatched by Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. This is something that he has long wanted to happen, to have the United States engage in this type of regime change military operation, because he has made claims about Iran's nuclear program also that are false. There is no indication whatsoever that the Iranians were close at all to having the enriched uranium sufficient for a nuclear warhead. And the strikes that were carried out last year that Trump claimed had obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, it clearly was a real setback to them. There's no imminent threat. And so carrying out this war without the rationale that is needed, and as Mark said, that you need to get the American people and you need to get, in fact, the international community behind you. And so I do think that this is going to be seen as very unjustified, unconstitutional, certainly. But what happens now in the aftermath, not just in the days and weeks ahead, but what's going to happen in the months and years ahead, in terms of the devastation that is taking place inside of Iran? Is the United States going to be responsible for actually giving the billions upon billions of dollars that is necessary in order to allow the Iranian people to thrive in the future? But I think more imminently is going to be what is going to be the reaction of the remnants of the Iranian regime, those members of the IRGC and others, whether or not it's just the missile strikes across the Gulf, or they are going to engage in asymmetric attacks, including terrorism or cyber or whatever else. But again, we were right on the precipice. It seemed like there was more Iranian concessions in the nuclear negotiations. But this is the second time I think the Iranians feel that they've been duped. To have negotiations with the United States through the good offices of the Omanis, and only to be then this target of these devastating U.S. military attacks. So again, I think there's a real question of whether or not there's going to be any type of trust that is going to be in any type of negotiations that are going to follow these military operations between the United States and Iran.
There is no issue that divides the MAGA movement more than a hot war with Iran. There is dissent and dissatisfaction over the perceived cover-up of the Epstein files, but there's a hot war inside Trump's coalition. Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, Brian Kilmeade among the cheerleaders for a war against Iran. Today I saw that Mark Levine called Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson, quote, traitors.
This is a man that largely came into political relevance, claiming the idea that back in 2015 that he was against the Iraq War and he was against the long-term efforts in the Middle East. Of course, there's questionable records on that front. But I even asked Donald Trump last June, before 24 hours before those strikes on those three nuclear facilities, about Iraq and about the false intelligence of weapons of mass destruction to justify going into Iraq. And he told me, well, in that situation, there weren't actually nuclear weapons, essentially shoving aside what his own intelligence community said, as Director Brennan just laid out, about the realities in effectively trying to do what happened under the Bush administration. And the one line, though, back in June when he told me this was...
More recently, he told Joe Scarborough... he criticized the Bush administration for not taking the oil.
Exactly. He said that if you don't go in, keep the oil. If you do go in, keep the oil, which calls into question what is his plan here going forward. And when you're looking at the folks like, Charlie Kirk before his passing, right, was somebody who was saying we should not go and start a war with Iran. Pretty much everybody aligned with Donald Trump said we should not go forward with Iran. And here's the bigger issue is that cloud of trust. over not only around the Epstein files, but also this. Steve Witkoff, going in for any further negotiations from this point forward, has that cloud over him of whether he is actually working in good faith. There's one specific point I think that is worth noting here, and that is around the claim that ballistic missiles and more conventional missiles were a means of justifying moving forward with today's attack. That comes from senior Trump administration officials in the last hour, briefing reporters, essentially trying to outline why they moved forward with this attack. This is an important point, trying to use conventional missiles in the potential use of them by Iran on U.S. military installations around the region, because just yesterday in the interview with our colleague David Rode, the Omani foreign minister, who was the one shuttling the notes back and forth, said that there was no mandate to have a discussion about conventional missiles and that those would be left to regional talks, and that they had, in fact, had those discussions. There are so many questions, not just about the justification used, but also about what the end game is here. As everybody has said, that has not been laid out here in these first 24 hours.
Were you surprised to hear Trump deliver these remarks in a taped video message after spending no time preparing not just the country, but his own political coalition for war on Tuesday night when he addressed the nation?
He had the opportunity to in the State of the Union address. And he never was specific about what red lines there were, right? If you go back to 2001 and 2002, both of those instances, the case was made by the Bush administration to Congress and the public to move forward with the use of military force. That didn't happen here at this point in time. And the president of the United States 2 weeks ago, he was directly asked, what can Iran do to avoid the attack? And Trump said, give us the deal that they should have given us the first time. They give us the right deal, we won't do that. But, you know, historically, they haven't done that. I will say they wanted to talk, but so far they do a lot of talking and no action. This is such a lack of specifics, and it wasn't for the work of journalists too trying to get these answers. I can't tell you how many times I asked the White House for specifics of what they wanted out of the Iranians. And it's not clear based off of the Omani foreign minister's own testimony here in the last 24 hours that there's deep questions about whether Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in this White House were ever working in good faith or whether they intended to move forward.